now they say for the purposes of 1 lakh more items which can be categorized as supplied. When we say all means the whole, no exceptions. All forms of supply of goods. What is form? Anything that can be categorized as movable and can be bought and sold as goods. It could be cigarette, it could be liquor, it could be juices, it could be sherbets. They are all forms of goods. Good doesn't mean cement, paint and all. Anything that is sold in the market and buys it as goods, that is why they have used the phrase called all forms of goods. All forms of supply of goods, services or both, such as sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease, or disposal made or agreed to be made. Disposal made or agreed to be made. Go back to Sales of Goods Act section 4. What's the difference between agreement to sell and sale? It is recognized in the definition of sale. Now this is very, very important because there is a lot of litigation happening in Maharashtra side of this issue. Sir, हमारा तो agreement to sell था, ये था, वो था, सब बकवास है. Once you have a written agreement to do what? To do any of the supply, any of these words or other words may be included. Disposal made or agreed to be made. Supposing somebody comes to you, okay, I want this table to be made by you. This you advance. Now, this table you have to give it to him. That is, you have to dispose of to him. Therefore, this is covered within definition of sale. So, all advance money that you receive, that is covered by this phrase, disposal made or agreed to be made. Right? So, tax liability has arisen. Agreed to be made. That is, tax liability will happen when you dispose this table to him. That is an agreement to sell. Agreement to sell shall convert into sale when all the preconditions of the agreement to sell are satisfied by the seller. Same thing is here. Disposed of or agreed to be disposed of. For a consideration. So go back to section 231. Yesterday we did consideration. It's a very huge definition. Let's go through it very quickly, the first part. Consideration in relation to supply of goods or services or both. So section 7 deals with supply of goods or services or both. And then whatever definition consideration there, it's all covered here. Any kind of money, any kind of consideration, including barter, etc., is covered by section 2, subsection 31. Why we are saying? Because they are using the word consideration. And this word is defined in the Act. There can be no other definition of consideration. If you fall in section 2, subsection 31, not necessarily money or currency or bank deposits or RTGS. It can be any form of consideration. If it's covered by section 2, subsection 31, then the concept of supply is covered. By a person, not taxable, not registered, just by a person. So where is person defined? You can note down the section there, 284. So the section 7 doesn't presuppose that supply should be made by a taxable or a registered taxable person. Any person. That is, if a person makes a supply of goods above 40 lakh, he is required to be registered and become a taxable person. And he applies for registration, then section 25 issues him certificate, he becomes registered taxable person. There's a difference. Required to be registered, taxable, registered. Taxable person need not necessarily be a registered person. Only when he applies for registration, he gets it, he becomes a registered taxable person. In the course or furtherance of business. Yesterday there was a question put up to me, what does this phrase mean? Today we will discuss this phrase. In the course of business. Go back to definition of business. 217. A It's an inclusive definition. I may not go through it. It will only waste time to go through, but you must go through. In the course of business, that is anything that can be categorized as business in terms of section 217. The justum generis principle you have applied. If any activity follows such activity that be deemed to be a business. A business need not be a legitimate business. You may be doing a totally illegal business. For example, you are running a massage center. In our country, it's a taboo, it's illegal. You are doing a dating service. It's applicable in India also. That's a service. You can't say, no, it's immoral. Isme GST lagega. No, law does not distinguish between legitimate or illegitimate activities of supply of goods or services or both. Therefore, tax shall be levied if it is more than 20 lakh for services and its goods more than 40 lakh. ये कितने लोग कस्टम का स्मगल्ड गुड्स बेचते हैं फ्रॉड की तरह फेसबुक पे ला कर हमने एम्बेसी से खरीदा ये खरीदा बकवास झूठ सारा फ्रॉड होता है वैसे वो दे आर ऑल टैक्सेबल इनफैक्ट 2 of these guys were raided last week in Lajpat Nagar by custom people not by GST people. They were saying custom confiscated material. वो कह रहे हमने कौन से इसको मार दिया कहाँ से आ रहा है और रेड कर दिया वहां एक लड़का है विश्वास खुराना उसको मुझे फोन आया क्या करना है कुछ नहीं करना है पैसे देकर भगा दे इनको उसको कुछ जेल में डाल दे तुम क्या क्या लिखता रहता है फेसबुक पे कहते 2 टके का तरह पलंग है तुम्हारा कस्टम कन्फिस्केटेड 100 रुपये बना खरीदे कोई therefore the business does not distinguish between legitimate or illegitimate business as long as you are crossing the taxable turnover that is 20 lakh for services in Delhi and for goods above 40 lakh.
So like cryptos and NFTs.
Yes.
The most.
We will discuss crypto. इसमें मेरा एक वीडियो है.
I know. And I.
You read that?
From that video, I wanted to share my inputs because I have done a lot of research on that.
उस पे crypto में बहुत problem हो गया.
Wherein you have specifically said that the youngsters should look forward to this
litigation. 5 कमिश्नर ने इसको रिजेक्शन किया. कहता आप लोगों को बता रहे हो टैक्स लगेगा मैं इसमें लगा दिया टैक्स. GST is often. It's a reserved by GST. Anyway. By a person in the course of business, in the course of furtherance of business. When we say in the course of, when you do primary activity of your business, that is in the course of. Supposing you sell electronic goods, this is your primary activity. That is your course of business. Or for furtherance of business, you do gift scheme, you do sales promotion, you do advertising, you take part in exhibitions, melas. They are all for furtherance of business. That is the distinction between in the course or furtherance of business. So if any of the activity you do and you supply goods in the course or furtherance of your business, it is all covered by section 7.1. And therefore, it is, if it is for consideration, it is taxable. We are discussing 7.1. 7.1a. 7.1aa. This is an amendment in December 21. The activities or transactions. Now the 2 words are, they are not defined in the Act. What is activity? What is a transaction? Activity is through which you acquire a transaction. Activities, supposing you are making a table. This is an activity. When you sell it, becomes a transaction. So any activity or a transaction by a person, again not taxable, not registered taxable, just a person, other than an indivisible. Remember, unless, except, other than, they create an exception. You have to read in between. So 7.1aa shall be applicable to anybody else except other than indivisible. If you go through definition of person, it includes indivisible. But here, for the purposes of 7.1aa only, person has been redefined to exclude individual. So if you do not read it carefully, you will apply definition of person and make individual also taxable. But this say other than individual. So the individual component part of definition of inclusive definition of person has been excluded for the purpose of 7.1aa. To its members or constituents or vice versa for cash, deferred payment, other valuable consideration. This is basically for housing societies. The dispute is going on, but most of the courts have confirmed, so there is no issue. There is a recent ruling, I think I told you yesterday, where a donation was given by a satisfied residential apartment owner to a society of 10 lakh rupees. GST people say pay tax. Donation. That they not giving you donation. He was giving you donation because he was satisfied with your service. Therefore pay tax now. So most of the business newspaper reported is this is where is GST going? But that is how law is developed. That is how this law will take us forward and settle somewhere after 10 years maybe. 10 साल लगेंगे इसको सेटल होने में. इस तरह के क्वेश्चन आ रहे हैं. So this is basically for societies, clubs, and there has been a retrospective levy. There was Supreme Court judgments in West Bengal club case where they say it cannot be levied, but now they say it can be levied. We will do this when we come to that particular issue. Now see explanation. I told you what is the function of explanation. There is a proviso, there is an explanation, there is a subclause, there is a subsection. Supposing you see subsection 1. Now when we are reading 1AA, this is subclause. Subsection is when you go to 7.2. That is called subsection. Explanation gives clarity to the main provision. So here they have added an explanation to clarify what do the lawmakers mean by writing what they have written other than individual, how their liability arises. They say for the purposes of this clause, only for this clause. This is the way you have to learn to read. Only for this clause, this means this. It is hereby clarified that notwithstanding, remember notwithstanding, it will overpower any other provision. Notwithstanding anything contained in any other law, that means GST के अलावा अगर कोई भी और लॉ है जहाँ पे ऐसी exemption है वो नहीं दी जाएगी. Notwithstanding anything contained in any other law for the time being in force or any judgment, decree or order of any court, tribunal or authority, the person and his members or constituents shall be deemed to be two separate persons. The Supreme Court ruling was there is no difference between member and the clubs. If there are not two persons, you can't provide a service to yourself. They say we will treat them two and charge tax. अभी litigation शुरू हुआ है इसके ऊपर. People are going to Supreme Court again. Sub clause B. Import of services for a consideration whether or not in course of furtherance or business. So if you are importing a service, reverse charge जो आप देते हैं सर्विस पे, it's not necessary that you should be doing in the course of business or service. Once you are importing a service, then section 24 gets invoked. And there is no exemption for this. So does it mean if I import a medical advice of 1 lakh rupees from America, will I pay tax? Food for thought for you, we will discuss this. तो सेक्शन 24 में exemption है सुरेश नहीं
तो आसिम आ गया ना.
मैं वही तो बोल रहा हूँ कि फिर नंबर लूंगा.
ये तो ऐसे बताते
यार मैं तो आपसे पूछ रहा हूँ, मैंने तो कभी जिंदगी में प्रोसीजर फॉर्म नहीं देखा. अभिषेक क्या करेंगे इसमें? What is not personal use then?
Then if you are crossing the limit, you have to get paid.
Okay, we will discuss this. So two issues have already come. So we will give some more dimension to it when we start doing schedules. फिर तो है ही. फिर आपसे क्या पूछ रहा था? फिर हमें पता देना है यार. बताओ देना कैसे नहीं देना है वो बताओ. Import or service whether or not in the course of furtherance of business, the activities specified in Schedule 1 made or agreed to be made without a consideration. So even if there is no consideration, still they should be deemed to be supplied. But their category is Schedule 1. So let's go to Schedule 1 at the end before we go further. If the schedule was not a part of section 7, I will never pay tax. There is a Supreme Court judgment where this schedule was made without amending the definition part of it. Supreme Court quashed the demand. So since it's a part of the schedule, since you're dealing with supply and supply is taxed in section 9, therefore schedule 1 becomes a part of integrated transaction of section 9 itself. Activities, what is the marginal heading? The headings given on a schedule or a section is a very weak tool for interpretation. Very weak. Marginal heading in few cases have been held to be very weak tool of interpretation. Activities. Why did I tell you difference between activity and a transaction? Only for this reason. Schedule 1 talks of only activities, not transactions. For all forms of activity or transaction, Schedule 1 doesn't talk of transactions. It talks of activities to be treated as supply even if made without consideration. Permanent transfer or disposal of business assets where input as credit has been availed on such assets. So where input as credit has not been claimed, then it's not supply. Only under this provision. We are discussing only Schedule 1, no other provision. Permanent transfer of disposal of business assets where input as credit has been availed on such assets. Supply of goods or services or both between related persons or between distinct persons as specified in section 25 when made in the course or furtherance of business. For example, you do a cross charge. This is one such activity. The role of intermediaries, also quotes and whether covered by section. Will you exempt? Yes. But the word uses to an employee, no employees. Had they written 2 employees, then gross value was 50,000. So this is the difference. When you read carefully, the meaning becomes crystal clear. How do we interpret it? Alphabetically, there is a difference between A and N also. When we come to drafting, we'll tell you how do we write grammar when we draft appeal, objection. में क्या difference होती है in alphabets? ये vowels हम बोलते हैं, but what difference है? Supply of goods by a principal to agent, where the agent undertakes to supply such goods on behalf of the principal. So go back to agent definition. The definition of principal and agent are different. Agent definition should have reverse of principal, but however agent definition is very extensive. So अगर कोई principal अपने agent को माल बेचता है, वो कहता है ये माल मेरा आगे बेचो, तो supply without consideration है but taxable है. By an agent to his principal, where the agent undertakes to receive such goods on behalf, it is same principle what we have Central Sales Tax Act. If an agent buys goods on behalf of a disclosed buyer, the sales tax goods move from one state to another. Import of services by a person from related person or from any of his other establishment in India in the course or furtherance of business. Now this is where we attack, which a question I ask you, import of service for a consideration of whether or not in the course of furtherance of business. When we say of personal use, this is where you draw from a personal source is not an activity. It's a part of the schedule. Therefore, we say import of services by a person from a related person or from any of his other establishment outside India in the course of furtherance of business. And if you correlate with this, import of services for a consideration whether or not in the course of furtherance of business, both are two different propositions. Schedule 1 tax when there is no consideration. Where we are talking in subclause B of 7.1, they are talking in a very different tone. But here the tone is different. The amendment has some problems here. We will discuss them. Next, the activity special schedule 1, this we have done. 7.1 capital A. Where certain activities or transactions constitute a supply in accordance with the provisions of section 1, they shall be treated as supply of either supply of goods or supply of services as referred in schedule 2. अब जितने भी आपके झगड़े थे वैट में, वो आपने क्या डबल टैक्सेशन होता, राइट टू यूज में ट्रांसफर होता था, कोई आप बनाते थे, सॉफ्टवेयर बनवाते थे, ये झगड़े वर्क्स कॉन्ट्रैक्ट में झगड़े, गुड्स पे क्या लगेगा, सर्विस क्या लगेगा, सब झगड़े खत्म। उन्होंने बोले हम आपको बताएंगे कि ये एक्टिविटी हम एज ए सर्विस ट्रीट करेंगे या सप्लाई ऑफ गुड ट्रीट करेंगे, राइट। सो लेट्स गो बैक टू शेड्यूल 2. Well, this is the last thing we'll do today. If we time can, schedule 3 is also big, but schedule 3 can be done faster. अब ये इंटरप्रिटेशन है टू एन एम्प्लॉय, they are not talking of bonus, they are talking of gift.
Bonus is not gift.
Bonus is not gift, sir.
That's a financial transaction.
See, you may categorize anything as anything. I told you document do not disclose a transaction. Transaction is what you have done. Bonus is not a gift. कंप्यूटर दे दिया, फोन दे दिया, हॉलीडे ट्रिप दे दिया, these are gifts. अबे तो उसको बोनस दिया तो वो कोई बोनस चाहिए आपसे? ये this is the question I am putting myself. In my view, if you have 50 employees to 50,000 सबको एक गिफ्ट देते हैं, सारे के सारे माफ हैं. The word using hand to an employee. अगर इसको हम ये इंटरप्रिटेशन ले कि 1000 में से एक ही एम्प्लॉय को गिफ्ट माफ होगा, it will lead to absurd results. That is not the intention of. मतलब सिर्फ 50,000 का एग्जाम्पशन देंगे अगर 200 करोड़ की टर्नओवर है तो that is not the intention of this. Right? So that's very clear. I am very clear on this issue. Schedule 2. Again, marginal handling is activities or transaction to be treated as supply of goods or supply of services. That is, notwithstanding in whichever category the transaction may fall, activity may fall, you will treat them as per Schedule 2. तो लॉ itself declares कि ये सारी ट्रांजैक्शन गुड्स हैं या सर्विसेज हैं या क्या है. Let's take the first one. Transfer. What is transfer? Transfer is where your all rights are transferred to somebody else in drama. That is, you are left with no right. That is transfer. That is what transfer of property is. What is transfer of property in goods? What is how we define sale is a transfer of property of goods from one person to another. That means ये ग्लास मैंने आपको दे दिया, ये आपका बन गया. I have no right on glass except for claim of consideration. That is called transfer. ये जब इसको अभी इसको एग्जामिन करेंगे तो आपको ये बड़ा हेल्प करेगा ट्रांसफर का मतलब क्या है. लाइक राइट टू यूज में आप राइट ट्रांसफर नहीं करते, यू ओनली ट्रांसफर राइट टू यूज द गुड्स. गुड्स आर नॉट ट्रांसफर टू द यूजर, यू ओनली ट्रांसफर ए राइट. Here you use the word transfer means you are transferring everything whatever you have. Any transfer of the title in goods is supply of goods. अगर आप किसी को माल बेचते हैं, this will be supply of goods. तो जो गुड्स के रेट है वो लगे. इसका कॉन्सिक्वेंशियल इफेक्ट यही है कि जो गुड्स के रेट है उस पर वो रेट लगेंगे. Any transfer of right in goods or of undivided share in goods without the transfer of title thereof is a supply of service. So right to use has been declared as a service. इसमें दो चीजें. पहला कहते हैं any transfer of right in goods or of undivided share of goods. पहले में तो क्लियर है. What is the undivided share of goods? क्या होता है बताओ. राहुल बताओ. मुझे नहीं बताओ. Undivided share in goods. Anybody?
Dividing of the
And yes?
sir, scope of property by 4 persons. Many floor
Example दो.
so like 20 by building right.
Building is not goods. Goods की बात करो. Building is not goods. Goods are movable only.
Sir, right use of a vehicle by
Can you have undivided share in a vehicle? Vehicle is one.
TV.
टीवी में क्या?
रिमोट भी होगा
टीवी में उनके पैसे लूंगा यूज करने के, समझ है?
Sir, workstation होते हैं जो वो
Yes, yes. Thank you. Nowadays you have 4 partners owning 20 workstations. They all have 5 workstations individually. You transfer that right in undivided share, that is 5. इसमें division नहीं हुआ. It's informal thing. That is also taken as service.
kindly explain it.
आपके इसमें हमने बना दिया 20 वर्कस्टेशन, दे आर गुड्स, दे आर गुड्स, राइट? 4 पार्टनर है, आपका 5 का अनडिवाइडेड शेयर है, कहते हैं मैं ट्रांसफर किया, दैट इज ऑल्सो ए सर्विस, नॉट एज राइट ऑफ गुड्स. यू आर टैक्सिंग एन अनडिवाइडेड शेयर फॉर विच यू आर गेटिंग पेड.
Virtual address.
हाँ, virtual address, yeah, that's the common type. Any transfer of title in goods under an agreement which stipulates that property in goods shall pass at a future date upon payment of full consideration as agreed is a supply of goods. Supposing you give an order to Thermax manufacture a furnace for me for my factory, right? Whenever furnace is manufactured and put on your site, it is supply of goods. Because normally the furnaces are not fixed to the earth, they are detachable nowadays. आजकल वो वाले नहीं बनते. Land and building. Any lease, tenancy, easement, license to occupy land is supply of service. Any lease, tenancy, easement, license to occupy land is a supply. ये चारों के चारों अलग-अलग वर्ड है. चारों के चारों supply of service माने जाएंगे. Any lease or letting out of building, including a commercial, industrial, or residential complex for business or commerce, either wholly or partly, supply of service. So anything let out for residence is not taxable, everything else is taxable. Treatment of processes, job work. So remember job work? When you apply a treatment or a process by any person on the goods belonging to a registered person, we call this job work. And also remember definition of manufacturing. If you use goods of another person and convert them into a different commercial commodity, that is manufacturing. Now this is applicable only for job work. Any treatment process which is applied to another person goods is a supply of service. A job work has been declared as a service. Transfer of business assets, merger acquisitions for example, where goods forming part of the assets of business are transferred. We'll stop here. That is, what are being transferred? Goods, not land building. This clause doesn't need to be land building. So whenever you draft an agreement for merger, acquisition, transfer, or whatever, sale, purchase, whatever you do, you have to, as per GST law, specify each clause wise, so that there is no ambiguity in your drafting. If your document you draft is subject to an interpretation, your client is get. You should never draft a contract or a letter or a document or a reply which requires an interpretation by a revenue authority. That is not like in your favor ever. That's not their job to favor you in anything. Right? So, we are dealing with only where goods forming part of the assets of business. Assets की definition है इसमें?
नहीं.
मेरे को ध्यान नहीं. Assets की definition है. So where goods की definition है आपके पास, forming part of assets of a business की definition है, are transferred or disposed of by or under the directions of the person carrying on business, so as no longer to form part of those assets. Such transfer or disposal is a supply of goods by the person. For example, a person employs an auctioneer, Betty & Company, you're a saman बेचता हूँ. So this is, his goods are being forming part of the business. Goods forming assets for the part of the business are being disposed of by a person for his behalf. Or he himself auctions, that is by himself. Then this will be taken to be supply of goods by the person on whose behalf auction being conducted or who is himself conducting auction. Whereby under the direction of a person carrying on business, goods held or used for the purpose of business are put to any private use or are used or made available to any person for use for any. I think this is not very relevant. होता नहीं है. We go to see very persons are sold is a going concern. Your assets are gone. आपके गुड्स खत्म हो गए ना, तो आपके स्टॉक में तो गुड्स हैं, डिस्पोजल तो दिखाना है ना आपको उसको. आप बोलोगे मैंने तो गोइंग कंसर्न भेज दिया. Somebody questions you and you show your agreement which is not a going concern, there is no law. सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने भी जो भी जजमेंट दिया सब गड़बड़ है. Depends on facts of those cases. So going concern means in nutshell assets liabilities as a whole should be sold. There are few cases where part has been allowed, but majority view is that everything should be
Sir, a
sold.
vague thought. How about the sale of Air India by GOI to their assets have been sold differently? So,
हमें तो agreement है नहीं.
so I'm just, it's a vague thought.
Yes, if I have the GST officer, I'll examine it. हिम्मत
Tata Birla, Ambani, Himmat wala question.
tax government को देना है. It is supplied by government, not by Tata. You are forgetting this main fact.
But still, sir, I am
It's
just
exempt.
Yes.
It's exempt. Going concern person will not come here. The sale by government, वो देखना है कि ये exemptions पे है या नहीं, वो देखेंगे. अगर गवर्नमेंट ये नहीं होता अब तक से एग्जामिनेशन हो गया होता. इतनी बड़ी डील थी.
आपको स्टेट
It has to be really sold to him. पार्टनर को ट्रांसफर कर दो सब स्टॉक को.
प्रोवाइडरशिप
हैं?
प्रोवाइडरशिप
भेज दो.
टैक्स पे करना पड़ेगा जब नया
अब
नंबर
आप उसका टैक्सेबल क्वांटम नहीं बनेगा तो कैसे भेजोगे? नहीं उसके स्टॉक पे टैक्स देना पड़ेगा.
तो सेल उसको नया नंबर लेना फिर
नहीं नंबर तो कैंसिल हो गया. अब सेल क्या करेगा? ही कांट सेल.
उसको नया नंबर वहाँ ये अपने उसी सेम पैन के ऊपर
आज के टाइम में नया नंबर लेने से पहले वो कहते हैं आपका एक पुराना नंबर था इसका रिटर्न फाइल करना आपको टैक्स पे करो तो ना
Sir, this is a new litigation just to add in for all the information of everybody.
हेलो.
So yesterday also this query came to Mr. Sanjay Sharma, who is our bar president, from an ITIT member. But those slow motor conditions clarifications are also coming. They are talking about after 6 months, 1 year, because so this litigation is coming in that nowadays GST authorities are watching कि आपका suppose 2 करोड़ 4 करोड़ का stock पड़ा था, हमने आपको cancel. We have got a new, what people are nowadays doing, they are finding the new, they are getting the new PAN number. Through wrong means they are transferring their stock and continuing the business and giving a clarification to the government कि सर ये तो हमारा ही था, आपने number cancel कर दिया था. So merely on the basis I cannot lose my ITC because that is the biggest lacuna which is there, right? And they are forgetting that they have not complied with Form 10, which is the final form. Procedural form also we need to look into. Right? So this is becoming a next litigation. अगर आप
इस पे कोई लिटिगेशन है नहीं because the schedule itself you will pay tax. This is supply you will pay tax. The stock you are holding when you cease to do business.
बिजनेस भी रनिंग था कभी बंद नहीं हुआ था खाली रिटर्न फाइल लेके नंबर कैंसिल हो गया
so that is
हाँ तो you cease to business no?
खत्म कैसे हो गया stock का ITC
They will examine it. It's not an issue here at present. ये प्रधान लोग हैं रजिस्ट्रेशन बारे में मैं तो कभी देखा ही नहीं but this legal point I'll answer your Monday. I'll examine it myself. Next is the business transfer is going concern from the person or the business is carried on by a personal relative who is deemed to be a taxable person. That is, if you transfer the business to some your personal relative, then he is deemed to be a taxable person. इसमें आपको कोई सप्लाई नहीं मानी जाएगी. तो बंदा मर जाता है उसका बेटा उसको टेक ओवर कर लेते हैं इसमें सप्लाई नहीं मानी जाएगी. 5 is more important. The following shall be treated as services, namely renting of immovable property. Construction of a complex building, civil structure or part thereof, including a complex of building intended for sale to a buyer, wholly or partly, except where the entire consideration has been received after the issuance of completion certificate, where required by the competent authority, or after his first occupation, whichever is earlier. We will stop here before we read explanation. अब ये क्या कहते हैं? It's not an inclusive definition. It says construction of a complex building, civil structure or part thereof. ये 4 part अलग हो गए. Then it takes including कॉमे के बाद. Including a complex or building intended for sale to be buyer, wholly or partly. That is अगर ये काम आप करते हैं, this is supply of service taxable. However, after you complete the construction, सारा पैसा आपको बाद में आता है और फर्स्ट ऑक्यूपेशन के बाद आता है, तब उस पर टैक्स नहीं लगेगा। टैक्स नहीं लगेगा तो आपको इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट भी नहीं लगेगा। दैट इज, लेट्स टेक एन एग्जांपल, सपोजिंग दिस कॉन्फ्रेंस हॉल आई बिल्ट ऑन माय ओन। Rahul Kakarkam is firm, how much? I said 2 crores. Take 2 crores. It's already go, no tax. But supposing I approach him before I start constructing. He said, Mr. Verma, I want this. The young man, he wants a lot of gadgets in this. I'll pay you 2.5 crore, take 50 lakh advance. The entire 2.55 crore is taxable.
And you get the ITC.
Oh, that I don't know.
Yes.
That I don't know.
सर एक चीज छोटी सी
Second
बताओ
sitting, we are not discussing it there. Now, the question is, even if you take 1 rupee advance, transaction becomes taxable. That is the function of the word entire. No court can give you discretion. Entire doesn't mean ke 1 rupee, 10%, 5%. That is why all these builders are under huge investigation by GST authorities on this particular issue where they are not paying tax.
Collaboration is the biggest.
So therefore, whenever a builder comes to you, I plan to construct a building, maybe a residential complex, whatever, it's all taxable. उसका आपको देखना है कि उसको बोलना भैया पेमेंट नहीं, पेमेंट बाहर से नहीं लेनी, बैंक से लोन लेने। I had done a matter in Vasant Vihar, big firm in Delhi, 12 करोड़ रुपए के एक फ्लैट था, 5 फ्लैट थे, 500 के, 7 करोड़ रुपए की ट्रांजेक्शन, ऑल वाइट, सारे बड़े बड़े आदमी। पहले 60 करोड़ का मतलब है कि 18% टैक्स, जो भी टैक्स था, क्या करना है? बाकी इनसे पैसे मत लो, इनको बैंकों से लोन लेके अपनी कोलेटरल गारंटी दे दो। They followed. Finished. We took the payment after we handed over the flat to them. So if you have to do some kind of tax planning, we should be very legitimate and legal. And I gave in writing that you can do this. There's no bar.
what happens to the builder who gets the completion certificate and
You have interest in the proposition.
सर मैं पूछ रहा हूँ
Explanation. You can always discuss with me. You are free to discuss. Explanation. For the purpose of this clause, not this section, only for the purpose of clause B. The expression competent authority means that is first occupation जो भी certificate आपको लेना है ये लोग दे सकते हैं आप. Means the government issue the completion certificate where required by the competent authority or after its first occupation, whichever. For a competent authority means the government or any authority authorized to issue completion certificate. ये नहीं कि आपने contractor से ले लिया कि completion हो गया मेरा. No. So one of these authorities. Why one of these authorities? The word used is or, not and. So continue to read this English what we discussed yesterday, and or. So they say the word used is or, so any one of these authorities can issue you a completion certificate depending on which locality you live in. 2. The expression construction includes addition, alteration, replacements or remodeling of any existing civil structure. अब बॉम्बे मालूम है कितना रीबिल्डिंग होता है, लाखों करोड़ रुपए per month. So therefore they have covered that also here. So builder has to complete the entire complex at his own cost, then transfer at the agreed price. Otherwise he pays GST. That is the meaning of what does this meaning of construction includes. Temporary transfer or permitting the use or enjoyment of any intellectual property rights. They have used the word temporary. Otherwise the right to transfer. They have used temporary. Exhibitions में लोग यूज करते हैं, मेलों में यूज करते हैं, अपने कॉन्फ्रेंसेस में यूज करते हैं, उसमें पैसे लेगा तो टेम्परेरी ट्रांसफर ऑफ IPR है. Otherwise, if you have a trademark, etc., this can be covered in transfer of right to use goods. They have been held as goods by Supreme Court. So they have added the word, prefix the word temporary. Temporary transfer of or permanent use or enjoyment of any intellectual property right. Development, design, programming, customization, adoption, upgradation, enhancement, implementation or information technology software service. तो वो झगड़े ये गुड्स हैं क्या सब झगड़े खत्म करती है. अब इसमें क्या है? डेवलपमेंट, डिजाइन, प्रोग्रामिंग, कस्टमाइजेशन, एडॉप्टेशन, अपग्रेड, इसमें सेल नहीं है. इट इज गुड्स. वो पहले में हो जाएगा ट्रांसफर, इसे सप्लाई. Services only when you do one of these activities. This is not an inclusive definition. Agreeing to the obligation to refrain from an act or tolerate an act or a situation to do an act. कल का वाला example दिया था मैंने आपको. That will take to the service. If I defame Rahul Kakkar, he wants to file a case against me and says that don't file, I give you 10 lakh rupees. It's a service. But इसमें 3 वर्ड है. Agreeing to the obligation to refrain from an act. और टू टॉलरेट एन एक्ट. ये कहता है मेरे को गाली और दे रहा 10 लाख रुपए और दे दो, मैं टॉलरेट कर लूंगा, पैसे दे दो, 10 लाख रुपए दे दे, कोई बात नहीं. और ए सिचुएशन और टू डू एन एक्ट, ये सारे के सारे दे आर डीम्ड सर्विसेज. कुछ हुआ नहीं है. वो कहता है क्योंकि वो उसको हक था करने के, तेरे ऊपर केस करने का, वो नहीं कर रहा. ही इज रिफ्रेनिंग फ्रॉम डूइंग एन एक्ट एंड यू आर पेइंग हिम इट्स अ सर्विस. राइट. इस पर बहुत लिटिगेशन हो रहा है, इस पर बहुत ज्यादा. अब देखो एग्रीमेंट एंड रिस्ट्रेंट ऑफ ट्रेड, सेक्शन 11 कॉन्ट्रैक्ट एक्ट. जो एम्प्लॉय नौकरी छोड़ते हैं, कहते हैं भाई आप 2 साल हमारे कंप्यूटर को ज्वाइन नहीं करोगे. सारे टीसीएस इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स हैं. इसने भी चिट्ठी लिखी है प्राइम मिनिस्टर को कि हमारी तो पूरी लाइन में ऐसे कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स हैं. दिस इज द लॉ. सो एनीथिंग where the other person has the right to do an act or action against you and you restrain him from doing it by paying money, this will be deemed to be service. You will have to pay tax. This you get caught. Cash will do. Transfer of right to use any goods for any purpose, whether or not for a specific period, for cash, deferred payment or other valuable consideration. Now deferred cash payment, deferred payment is understandable. What is other valuable consideration? Can anybody explain?
Can give a car and you the road.
In exchange of that or barter.
Or
Giving some gold coins.
ये category है gifts है.
But when you do service, they use.
वो say Mr. Verma, you give me this all legal agreements for this building. I'll give you one office room for 10 years free. This is in lieu of my services. Other valuable consideration. You're dealing with services, not goods. Free. That is called other valuable consideration. It can be made, and that will also be taxable at fair market value.